Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Today I'm talking about Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. This was another big one from my childhood that sparked a lot of imagination in childhood me. It's another one of those gaming experiences that feels so large and infinite as a child, and then you come back to it and it feels teeny tiny. In this one, a fairy's planet becomes corrupted by this dark shadowy force, and one of the fairies escapes on a giant crystal shard. Unfortunately, the shadowy creatures caught up to her and destroyed the crystal into a bunch of tiny little shards, and she stumbles across Kirby, and now her and Kirby are tasked with going to the different planets and recovering all of these crystal shards. Early on in your adventure, you will encounter a couple other Kirby friends, the first being a generic Waddle Dee. You'll encounter a painter, and she can create paintings that come to life, and then you get aided by King Dedede every now and again. This being my first main Kirby game, there wasn't a lot that really stood out to me, but now that I've played through a ton of other Kirby games, this one's kind of a black sheep. First of all, the most obvious thing would be its appearance. It is a three-dimensional world that you're navigating through, but you're navigating on a two-dimensional plane, so I guess we'll call that 2.5D. You're not really going to be traveling along the Z-axis, just the X and the Y-axis, but the camera kind of rotates and turns to have the illusion of moving in a three-dimensional space. The other weird thing that makes this game stand out is there's no Meta Knight. In pretty much every other Kirby game that I can think of, there's always a Meta Knight, but that's not the case here. The other really big thing that sets this Kirby game apart from other Kirby games is you can combine two different powers together to make an entirely new ability. And so if you mix, say, the electric power with the ice power, you can then become a refrigerator that launches food out. Or if you collect the rock power-up and mix it up with the bomb power-up, now you can throw really powerful dynamite. And so really, like, the combinations just make this game feel so much more vast compared to other Kirby games. Now, this isn't the first and only time that they've kind of combined two powers together. The other one that really comes to my mind would be Kirby's Dream Land 2, where you have the animal companions, and depending on what power Kirby has, it kind of mixes up with the animal companions to make an entirely new ability. I think that this just takes it the next level up. I feel like there's a lot of really unique looking enemies as well. They took these simple polygonal creatures, but then made them all have their entirely unique identities, movements, behaviors. The bosses themselves at the end of each planet do stand out in my mind. So this game is broken up by 5 or 6 different planets. I can't remember off the top of my head, but each one is significantly shorter than a typical Kirby game. Each planet only has 3 levels and 1 boss fight, and so you can navigate through a planet if you're wanting to in, about 15 minutes. If you are trying to get a 100% completion with this game, you are going to have to spend a little more time hunting down these crystal shards. Some are more obviously located than others. Some are just kind of off the beaten path, but others you need to have certain abilities in order to unlock them. You might see a crystal shard blocked in a cage, and to get a clue as to what sort of power you need to open up the cage, just look at the colors, because each ability in Kirby 64 has a color attached to it. So your electric abilities are yellow, your ice abilities are blue, your cutter abilities are green, and so if you see a cage that is yellow and green colored, then you know that you need a combination of electric and cutter in order to open it up. There are some cases where it's not always obvious as to what ability you need to break open this secret area to get the crystal shard, and in those cases it can be rather frustrating because as far as I can tell, there's not an obvious indication for some of these more hidden crystal shards. So I remember just scouring some of these levels where it said I only have 2 out of 3 crystal shards for the level, and I would just search every nook and cranny, and I couldn't figure out where that 3rd crystal shard is. Luckily nowadays we live in the day and age of the internet, so we can just look up where that 3rd tricky crystal shard is, but you can imagine back in the day how difficult it was to actually 100% complete this game. It is a pretty short game, especially if you are looking these things up. It took me maybe 5 hours to 100% complete it, but it really is just one of those cases where this game felt so much bigger as a child. It does do that thing where if you beat the regular game, you do fight the boss, and okay, good job, you beat the boss, but there's like hints of the darker evil still being prevalent. And then if you do gather all the crystal shards, then you can try and face off against the eldritch horror, the things that I love about Kirby games, how you have these really dark creatures hidden at the end of the game. This one isn't too evil or too nasty. It definitely is weird, and it really is a cool boss fight, leaning more into that like pseudo 3D effect, but that's all. I'll get into that one. I do like the boss, not the secret end boss, but the boss to beat the regular game. I think it's really cool because it's like this elemental orb that will transform into all of the different abilities that Kirby has access to, and only the same ability can harm it when it's in that form. And so you have to like cycle between all these different powers like electrical and rock and bomb in order to defeat this thing. It's funny because I remember this being one of those games that I really locked in on, and to the point where I was doing the boss rush mode, and you have to defeat like all of the Kirby bosses with only like 5 hit points or whatever. And I remember actually doing it. It especially became difficult because you weren't allowed to absorb any of these abilities. You kind of had to just suck in the projectiles that these bosses would launch at you and then spit them back out at the bosses. But it gave me a real appreciation for these bosses, and it's crazy how this kind of stuff is just muscle memory even to this day, you know, 2 decades later, and I can just remember how to predict all of these bosses' movements and attacks. There's a couple other extra goodies. One of the collectible kind of things is at the end of each level, your friends are all just eating at a picnic, and then you can use Kirby, you can kind of direct Kirby in order to jump on certain items like a 1-up or healing items, or there is a mystery card, and if you land on this mystery card, it's basically just like a picture of one of the enemies that you might encounter in the game. But I guess in order to truly 100% complete this game, you'll need to get all of these cards. I did not do that. And that's another thing that sets this Kirby game away from others, is at the end of the level, you don't do that thing where you kind of like spring up and jump through the clouds and try to launch up as high as you can. There is no Kirby dance in this game, which is a travesty, but I guess they wanted to really lean into this more 3D effect, so you kind of have to aim along the X-axis and then jump along the Y-axis with this picnic game. There's also a pretty entertaining multiplayer game. I believe there's 3 different multiplayer mini games. They're Mario Party-esque, but I remember having a lot of fun with them. One of them has you're like suspended up on these floating blocks, and you can do this shockwave with your hammer, and it's kind of like Bomberman-esque, I guess, where you can destroy a row and the blocks fall down, and you're trying to stay on these blocks as long as possible while trying to get your opponents to fall down. There's one where it's like a jumping game where A is hop 1 space, B is hop 2 space, and you're trying to get to the end the very first, which is kind of tricky because there's other obstacles. There's one where you're trying to collect fruit that drops down from the tree. It's chaotic. It's just pointless fun when you got 3 other buddies all around the TV with you. The music is particularly catchy, very atmospheric. There's lots of like crystally type of sounds as you'd expect. There's a mysticism to it all. And I like the diversity of the different planets. Maybe you've heard this theory, maybe you haven't, but one of the final planets that you go to is called Shiver Planet. And as you're looking at the overview, it kind of looks like Earth. And the cool thing about this is like all of the levels are like an icy tundra or like a mechanical underground area. There's one particular level that has like these animal experiments in the background. And so it's a fan theory that this is like a post-apocalyptic Earth, which I think it's cool when they pepper in these darker themes in a light and bubbly Kirby game. Each world is also broken up by these little cinematics. They're just fun little scenes of Kirby and his friends. Usually Kirby is like the butt of the joke, where they're hanging out on a beach, and then the portal to the next planet pops up, but Kirby doesn't notice because he's getting tackled by a giant tidal wave, and just fun little scenes like that. I do wish that they utilized Kirby's friends more. Occasionally you'll come to these levels where you'll encounter Waddle Dee, and you'll kind of like sled down on a hill and you have to jump over obstacles. Or, I mean, the one that really gets underutilized is the painter, because basically you go into a room and the painter's like, here, I made you a maximum tomato or a 1-up. There are like 1 or 2 crystal shard puzzles revolving around the painter, but you're not like really interacting with the painter. There are several levels where you ride on King Dedede's back, which in theory would be pretty cool because he's really strong. He can jump high, he can hit things with his hammer, but then you realize, wow, it would have been so much easier just to go through this part of the level as Kirby, because King Dedede cannot hover, and so platforming gets a little tricky. And because King Dedede is so bulky, it's really easy for him to collide with enemies and take damage that way. But I do love, once you reach to the end of these King Dedede sections, how he just kind of chucks Kirby into the next room and then waves goodbye. It's a charming game. I personally really like it because of nostalgia. If you're a Kirby fan, I would definitely recommend you at least do a run through of it. It's a short enough game that you can experience it in a night if you'd wish. Overall, I think I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. Even if I hadn't played it before, I think I still would have enjoyed it immensely. I mean, the only real frustrating part about this game is if you are trying to get that 100% completion rate and you don't have the ability that you need to get the crystal shard, you gotta replay the level with said abilities. But other than that, I think that it is a pretty easygoing game. Lots to enjoy here. Well, folks, that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!